come from the financial sector because, yes, they definitely, I mean, especially people who work in the markets or they are advisors and talk to regular people about their money. They need to have a general idea of what's going on and what's coming, what's in store. And so those people are very receptive to Austrian economics, much more so in my experience than academia, at least the higher levels, because there's a sort of snootiness and a faux sophistication where, it's no, yeah, you peons, you see the Fed's monetary base tripling and you freak out, but I'm sophisticated enough to know in the right hands, we can handle this problem. We can definitely maneuver and do just the right amount of stimulus and then unwind it what we need to and thread that needle. Whereas, more practical people realize that that's a very dangerous thing to be doing. So I think you're right that people in the financial sector definitely respond when you explain Austrian business cycle theory. When I get up in front of a regular crowd of people, many of whom are from the financial sector, and I just explain the Austrian view on why, in a depression, the last thing you want is the government to run huge deficits, that you want to return savings to the private sector and boost private investment. I mean, they get that. They understand that. They understand that if the reason we're in this mess is because there was a leveraged housing boom with people taking on too much debt and interest rates being pushed artificially low, well, then they get, okay, the solution to that cannot be the government running huge, unprecedented deficits and the central bank pushing interest rates to unprecedentedly low levels, right? They get that makes no sense. So I think there is that sort of hope that people in the financial markets do understand the wisdom of Austrian economics.
Bob, I'm sure you've heard the old adage, never invest according to your ideology. And I'd like to get your thoughts on whether Austro-libertarian investors fall prey to this. In other words, it's almost akin to emotionally betting on your favorite sports team. We're so invested in Austrian economics that maybe it clouds or impairs at least our short-term investment decisions.
Well, yeah, that's probably good advice always for people to watch out for. And certainly, I know a lot of people in the Austro-libertarian community are very big fans of gold. And I certainly think people should have a stockpile of that, several months worth of their basic expenses, at least in terms of, having that much physical gold. But does that mean I'm sure gold is a great investment and that it's going to go up in the next 3 months? No, I don't know that. So there is a distinction between academic economists doing their thing and, charting courses for the macro economy and giving big picture trends about, hey, if the Federal Reserve does this, this is going to happen. We can't really get the timing right because we don't know when they're going to pull the trigger on something. So there's certainly a division of labor there and certain financial investment advisors. But they should know Austrian economics. Let me put it to you this way. Mises apparently said one time that, he studies money in financial markets, but he was never going to be rich off of it. And so I think knowledge of Austrian economics is necessary, but not sufficient to be a successful investor.
Well, do you think the stock market, the equities markets are essentially rigged against the little guy, the individual investor?
Well, I certainly think that the decisions that are being made by top Federal Reserve officials and other powerful people are not done with the interest of the little guy or Main Street in mind. I certainly agree with that. I think there are some trends, though. I mean, the market still is working where, the little guy can get access to equity markets more so than 30 years ago. However, I don't know that that's necessarily a good thing because it's a sort of perverse idea that's come up in America. I was certainly raised with this to think you are saving for your retirement by plunking away money in a well-diversified mutual fund where well-diversified means, it's like the whole S&P 500. It's not just a few tech stocks, right? And that's a different mentality from what it was, a century ago, let's say. I mean, you can read in Human Action where Mises just matter-of-factly talks about people buying bonds and having savings accounts and buying permanent life insurance policies. And that was the way the average household saved. Whereas now people think about saving as getting access to a bunch of stocks. And I think that that's a perversion that partly explains why the households right now are so vulnerable and why if the market does crash, it's such a social calamity because so many people have their, quote, retirement locked up in equity markets.
Bob, it's almost time to wrap this discussion up, but I wanted to ask you one final question. If we could do away with the Fed and regulatory capture by so many businesses and industries, how would stock markets operate in an Austrian universe? In other words, would they be noble but imperfect clearinghouses that allocate capital to its best and highest use, as opposed to sort of the cronyist casino they are today?
Yeah, I think, and that's the difficulty with this stuff is I've written stuff for Mises.org in the past. If people want to look up, it's the social function of the stock market and the social function of futures contracts. I think those are the titles, where things like the equity markets, capital markets in general, and even derivatives markets in a free society where there was no government backstop to those things and no special privileges, I think they would allow people to channel risk around. People who were risk loving would be able to take that on, and people who really wanted to have relative safety would be able to hedge that away. So there is a definite social function there. And yes, I think the stock price does convey meaningful information, right? So part of the whole Austrian message is that prices convey real information about the economy to everybody so that they can coordinate their plans. And the same is true for stock prices. Just to give you a silly example, if the stock price were far too low, then that allows somebody to come in and buy up a controlling interest in the company who probably shouldn't have that ability, right? You want the stock price to be high to signal the relative importance of that company and the value of its assets, to make sure only really qualified people are able to make executive decisions about how that company uses its assets. Just like Mises says, the high price on a natural resource is a signal to other entrepreneurs, use this with care, right? The consumers really like how this is being channeled into a few operations right now. And so that's what the social function of having high resource prices is. So I think it's the same thing with the stock market. Yes, there would still be mass psychology and there would be following in a crowd, and I'm sure there would be bubbles, but they would be much tamer because you wouldn't have this huge central bank apparatus fueling them, and you wouldn't have people believing in such things as like the Greenspan put, where they thought, well, we can go ahead and party while times are good and not worry about if we're taking on excessive risk, because if the whole system did start crashing, surely the authorities would step in and prop it up. So you wouldn't have that backstop. So I think people would be much more cautious during the upswing.
Cautious indeed. Dr. Robert Murphy, thank you so much for a fascinating interview. Bob blogs at consultingbyrpm.com. That's consultingbyrpm.com. Also go to Mises.org, type in Bob Murphy or Robert Murphy, and you will find dozens of his articles on our website. Ladies and gentlemen, have a great weekend.